The night was silent, except for the wind cutting through an empty street. A starving German shepherd, alone, shaking, his breath fogging in the cold, searched for scraps near a dumpster. Then, he heard it. A sound so small, so fragile, it stopped him in his tracks. He crept closer, and saw the impossible. A newborn baby, lying in the snow. That's when everything changed. Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. The wind howled through the empty streets like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bitter promise of a harsh winter night. Scout pressed himself against the brick wall of the abandoned grocery store, his matted fur doing little to shield him from the December cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. Once, he had known warmth, a soft bed, gentle hands, a voice that called his name with love. But that was before the accident, before the confusion of the shelter, before he'd slipped through a broken fence into a world that had no place for him. His ribs showed through his dull coat, each one a testament to the 3 weeks he'd survived on scraps and determination. The German shepherd's brown eyes, still bright despite his circumstances, scanned the alley for any sign of food or shelter. Most nights, he found neither. The dumpsters behind the Chinese restaurant 2 blocks over were his best bet, but he'd learned to time his visits carefully, after the kitchen staff left but before the rats claimed their territory. Scout's stomach growled, a sound that echoed in the silence of the sleeping town. He was about to move toward his usual hunting grounds when something made him pause. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was more like a disturbance in the air, a wrongness that made his ears prick forward and his muscles tense. Years of training, buried under months of survival instinct, suddenly surfaced. Something was out there in the dark, something that needed him. And despite the cold, despite the hunger, despite every reason to stay hidden and safe, Scout pushed away from the wall and began to move deeper into the shadows. The cry was so faint that Scout almost missed it beneath the rattle of wind through frozen gutters. He stopped mid-step, one paw raised, his entire body going still as he strained to hear. There it was again, a thin, desperate sound that tugged at something deep in his chest. Not a cat, not a rat, not any animal sound he recognized. This was something else entirely, something that made his hackles rise not in aggression but in alarm. Scout moved toward the sound with careful steps, his nails clicking softly on the icy pavement. The alley narrowed ahead, flanked by the backs of buildings that had long since closed for the night. Shadows pulled thick between the dumpsters and trash bins, and the single street light at the alley's entrance barely reached this far. The smell hit him before he saw anything, a mixture of wet cardboard, rotting food, and something else. Something clean and new and utterly out of place in this forgotten corner of the world. He approached a large dumpster, its green paint peeling in strips, and there, wedged between the dumpster and the wall, was a pile of discarded blankets and boxes. The cry came again, stronger now, and Scout's heart began to race. He nosed forward, pushing aside a piece of torn plastic, and then he saw it. Wrapped in a thin, stained blanket that might once have been blue, was a tiny human baby. Its face was red from crying, its small fists waving in the air as it wailed against the cold and the dark and the terrible abandonment. Scout had seen many things in his short life, but nothing had ever shocked him quite like this. For a moment, he could only stare, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Every instinct Scout possessed screamed conflicting orders. Run, humans were dangerous, unpredictable. Stay, something helpless needed protection. Hide, this wasn't his problem. Help, but who else would? His mind raced through fragmented memories. His first owner, the woman who'd trained him with patience and praise, the accident that had taken her, the shelter where strange hands had grabbed at him, the fear that had driven him into the night. Humans had given him everything, then taken it all away. Why should he trust them again? Why should he care? The baby's cries intensified, each wail cutting through Scout's internal debate like a knife. The infant couldn't be more than a few hours old. Even Scout's limited understanding told him that much. Its skin looked strange in the dim light, too pale, taking on a bluish tint at the edges. The temperature was dropping by the minute. Scout could feel it in the way the moisture in his nose began to freeze, in the way his paws ached against the concrete. This baby wouldn't survive the night. Not here. Not alone. The choice crystallized in Scout's mind with sudden clarity. He wasn't choosing to trust humans again. He was choosing to be the kind of creature his first owner had believed he could be. Loyal, brave, protective. She had always said he was special, that he had a good heart. Maybe this was why. Maybe all the pain and fear and hunger had been leading him to this exact moment, to this tiny life that hung in the balance. Scout moved closer to the baby, lowering his head to sniff carefully at the small bundle. The infant's eyes opened, wide and dark and unseeing, but its crying stopped for just a moment, as if registering this new presence. Then the cold reasserted itself, and the wailing resumed with renewed vigor. Getting the baby out from between the dumpster and the wall proved more difficult than Scout had anticipated. He couldn't simply grab the blanket with his teeth. The fabric was thin and the baby too fragile. Instead, he used his muzzle to gently nudge the bundle forward, working slowly and carefully to avoid hurting the precious cargo. His heart hammered in his chest, each movement measured against the terrible responsibility he'd taken on. What if he hurt it? What if he made things worse? But leaving it here would mean certain death, and that wasn't an option his conscience could bear. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Scout managed to work the baby free. He gripped the blanket carefully in his teeth, trying to distribute the weight evenly, and lifted. The baby was surprisingly light, too light, perhaps, but still awkward to carry. Scout had to hold his head at an uncomfortable angle to keep the bundle from dragging on the ground. The infant's cries had subsided into weak whimpers, a sound Scout found even more alarming than the earlier wails. He began to move, slowly at first, testing his ability to navigate with his unusual burden. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly before him, each step a calculated risk. His jaw ached already, his neck muscles straining. But he pressed on, one careful paw in front of the other, his breath coming in harsh puffs around the blanket. Where was he going? Scout didn't have a clear plan, just an instinct that drove him forward. Houses. He needed to find houses, people, someone who could help this tiny creature survive. His own neighborhood, if he could still call it that, was too far, too industrial. But he remembered seeing residential streets during his scavenging runs, places where lights glowed warmly in windows, and the smell of cooking food made his stomach cramp with longing. He turned toward the edge of the commercial district, toward the place where the forgotten city gave way to life and hope. Each block felt like a mile. Scout's jaw ached from the careful grip he maintained on the blanket, his teeth gentle but firm enough to keep the baby secure. The weight, though small, grew heavier with each step, and the awkward angle of his neck sent shooting pains down his spine. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The baby had gone quiet, too quiet, and that silence drove Scout forward with increasing urgency. His paws slipped occasionally on patches of ice hidden beneath the light dusting of snow that had begun to fall. Fat, lazy flakes drifted down from the black sky, landing on Scout's fur and melting into cold droplets that made him shiver. The streets were empty, as deserted as a ghost town. It was late. Scout had learned to read the rhythms of human life, probably past midnight, that dead hour when even the bars closed and the night shift workers were tucked safely in their workplaces. No cars passed. No people walked by. It was just Scout, the baby, and the merciless cold that seemed determined to claim them both. He paused at an intersection, setting the bundle down carefully to rest his aching jaw. The baby stared, letting out a weak mewl that was barely audible over the wind. Scout nosed the blanket anxiously, trying to tuck it more securely around the infant. He could feel the cold radiating from the small form, could see the bluish tint deepening around tiny lips and fingertips. Time was running out. He picked up the bundle again, ignoring the protest from his strained muscles, and pressed on. The residential area had to be close now. He could smell it, wood smoke from fireplaces, the lingering scent of dinner cooked hours ago, the particular mixture of detergent and warmth that meant homes filled with living, breathing people. His pace quickened despite his exhaustion, hope lending him strength. Just a little farther. Just a little more. The neighborhood that emerged from the darkness was everything Scout's alley was not. Neat houses lined the street, their lawns buried under pristine snow, their windows dark but emanating a sense of inhabited warmth. Christmas lights draped across roof lines and wound around porch columns, though most had been turned off for the night. Here and there, a plastic Santa or inflatable snowman stood sentinel in a front yard, deflated now in the late hour, waiting for tomorrow's resurrection. Scout stood at the edge of this world, suddenly aware of how he must look, a filthy, starving stray with a stolen bundle in his mouth, leaving tracks through the perfect snow. But appearance didn't matter now. Only survival did. Scout studied the houses with a critical eye, trying to determine which might offer the best chance of help. Too many had no lights at all, every window black. Others had decorations that suggested elderly occupants who might not hear him or might react with fear rather than help. He needed a family, young enough to act quickly, established enough to have resources. A house in the middle of the block caught his attention. It was a two-story colonial with a wide front porch and a toy tricycle barely visible under the accumulating snow near the garage. The porch light was off, but there was a faint glow from an upper window. Someone still awake, perhaps a parent with a restless child or an insomniac working late. More importantly, there was a storm door with a large window panel. Scout could reach that, could make noise against it, could make someone hear. He approached the house with determination, his paws leaving a trail of prints that led directly from the street to the front steps. The porch had 4 wide stairs, and Scout took them carefully, mindful of his cargo. When he reached the top, he gently set the baby down on the welcome mat, checking one more time that the blanket was secure. The infant was barely moving now, its breathing shallow and rapid. Scout's anxiety spiked into something close to panic. Scout backed up 3 steps and launched himself at the storm door, his front paws hitting the glass with a thump that echoed through the quiet night. Nothing. No lights, no movement, no response. He did it again, harder this time, the impact sending shocks through his shoulders. Still nothing. The dog's frustration mounted. How could they not hear? How could they sleep so soundly when a life hung in the balance just beyond their threshold? He began to back, deep, urgent barks that tore from his chest with desperate force. Each bark cost him energy he didn't have, but he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. The barking echoed down the empty street, surely loud enough to wake the dead. Scout threw himself against the door again and again, punctuating each impact with another volley of barks. His voice grew hoarse, his shoulders beginning to bruise, but finally, he saw movement through the frosted side light. A shadow appeared on the stairs inside, growing larger as someone descended. Scout barked with renewed vigor, his tail starting to wag despite his exhaustion. The porch light flared to life, temporarily blinding him. Scout backed up, positioning himself next to the baby, and continued his desperate plea. The front door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared, middle-aged, confused, wearing glasses and a bathrobe that suggested he'd been roused from sleep. "What the hell?" the man muttered, opening the storm door slightly to peer out. "Get out of here. Go on, get." But Scout didn't move. Instead, he nosed the bundle at his feet, then looked back up at the man, whining now instead of barking. The man's expression changed from annoyance to confusion, then to shock as his eyes finally registered what lay on his doorstep. "Oh my God," he breathed, pulling the door open wider. Diane. Call 911. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity that Scout watched from a cautious distance. The man, whose name Scout would later learn was Tom Peterson, dropped to his knees beside the baby, his hands hovering over the small bundle as if afraid to touch it. A woman appeared in the doorway, younger than the man, her long dark hair tangled from sleep. When she saw the baby, she let out a small cry and immediately pushed past her husband, her maternal instincts overriding any hesitation. "It's freezing," she said, carefully lifting the infant. "Tom, get blankets. Warm blankets, not hot. And call 911 right now." Scout watched as Diane Peterson cradled the baby against her chest, rushing back into the house. Tom fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed. Scout crept forward, unwilling to let the baby out of his sight after carrying it so far. He made it as far as the threshold before Tom noticed him. "It's okay, boy," Tom said, his voice distracted as he spoke to the emergency dispatcher. "Yes, an infant, can't be more than a few hours old." "No, we didn't, a dog brought it." "I know how that sounds, but it's true." "Yes, we are on Maple Street, 247 Maple Street. Please hurry." Scout's ears perked up at the tone of Tom's voice, not angry, not afraid, but urgent and concerned. He inched forward again, crossing into the warm house, drawn by the sound of the baby's renewed crying. Stronger now, indignant even, as warmth began to return to its tiny body. Diane was in the living room, kneeling by the fireplace where embers still glowed. She'd wrapped the baby in what looked like every soft thing she could find: blankets, towels, her own cardigan. Sure, it's okay," she murmured. "You're safe now. You're safe." A small girl appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, what's all the noise?" 7-year-old Emma Peterson had seen the entire thing from her bedroom window. She'd been awakened by the barking and had crept to the glass just in time to watch a skinny dog place something on their porch before attacking their door with desperate determination. At first, she'd been frightened. The dog looked wild, dangerous even. But then she'd seen the gentleness with which he'd handled the bundle, the way he'd positioned himself protectively beside it, and her fear had transformed into wonder. Now, standing at the top of the stairs in her flannel nightgown, Emma saw the dog standing in their entryway. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended species. This dog was a hero. Emma knew it in the same instinctive way she knew when it was going to rain, or when her mom was sad even when she smiled. "Emma, go back to bed," her mother called from the living room, but her voice was distracted, focused on the baby. Emma ignored the instruction and padded down the stairs, her bare feet making soft sounds on the carpet. She approached the dog slowly, one hand extended. Up close, he looked even worse than he had from her window, so thin she could count his ribs, his fur matted with dirt and ice, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But those eyes were kind, and when he looked at her, his tail gave a tentative wag. "You saved that baby," Emma whispered, or coloring her voice. "You a hero." Scout's tail wagged harder, and he took a step closer, allowing the little girl to touch his head. Her hand was warm and gentle, reminding him painfully of another little girl from his past life, before everything had fallen apart. "Emma." Tom's voice was sharp now. "Get away from that dog. We don't know if it's dangerous." But Emma didn't move. Instead, she turned to her father with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "He's not dangerous, Daddy. He's good. He saved that baby. We have to help him too." The ambulance arrived with a flourish of lights that painted the snow-covered street in alternating waves of red and blue. Scout watched from inside the house, pressed against Emma's legs, as two paramedics rushed up the porch steps with equipment and calm efficiency. They moved quickly but carefully, asking Diane questions about the baby's condition while examining the infant with practiced hands. Scout's anxiety spiked as they prepared to take the baby away. He'd carried it so far, fought so hard to save it. The idea of it disappearing into the night again filled him with irrational panic. He whined low in his throat, his body tensing. Emma felt the tension in the dog's frame and wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "They're going to help. They're the good guys." A police car pulled up behind the ambulance, and two officers emerged into the cold. Scout's wariness increased. He'd had bad experiences with uniforms in the past, people who'd chased him from doorways and garbage bins. But these officers seemed focused on the baby, not on him. They spoke in low voices with Tom and Diane, taking notes, asking questions about how they'd found the infant. "A dog brought it," Tom repeated for what seemed like the 100th time. "That dog, right there. He was barking and throwing himself against our door. When I opened it, the baby was there on the porch, and he was standing right next to it." One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, turned to look at Scout. She approached slowly, crouching down to his level but maintaining a respectful distance. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly. "That was pretty brave, what you did." Scout's tail gave a cautious wag. The officer looked up at Tom and Diane. "He's a stray. No collar." "Nothing," Diane confirmed. "He's in bad shape, malnourished, probably been on the streets for weeks." The officer nodded slowly. "We'll need to call animal control." The words animal control acted like a spark to dry tinder. Emma's grip on Scout tightened, and her face took on an expression of stubborn determination that her parents knew all too well. "No," she said firmly. It wasn't a whine or a plea, it was a statement of fact. "Emma, honey," Diane began, but her daughter cut her off. "He saved that baby's life. That baby would have died out there in the cold if he hadn't brought it here. He's a hero, and heroes don't get taken away by animal control." She knew what animal control meant. She wasn't a baby. They took dogs to the shelter, and if nobody adopted them, she couldn't even finish the thought. Tom exchanged a glance with his wife, then with the police officer. The paramedics were loading the baby into the ambulance now, the tiny form swaddled in warming blankets and connected to portable monitors. "The kid's got a point," the male officer said, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "That dog did something pretty extraordinary tonight. Saved a life, no question." "But we can't just keep him," Tom protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "We don't know anything about him. He could be sick, aggressive. Does he look aggressive?" Emma challenged, gesturing to Scout, who sat calmly at her side, leaning into her embrace. "He's the gentlest dog I've ever met. He let me hug him right away. He's perfect." The female officer stood up, brushing off her knees. "I'll tell you what. It's Christmas Eve morning now, technically. Animal control isn't even open until the day after Christmas. You folks would be doing us a favor if you could keep him for now. Give him some food and water. Let him rest. We can sort out the details after the holiday. Maybe by then, we'll have found his owner." It was a compromise that satisfied no one entirely but gave everyone a way forward. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine. But Emma, this isn't permanent. We are just fostering him for a few days until we figure out what to do." The ambulance pulled away into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying its precious cargo toward the hospital and warmth and life. The police followed shortly after, promising to return later for a more detailed statement. And just like that, the crisis was over, leaving the Peterson family standing in their living room with a stranger, four-legged and exhausted, but undeniably present. Diane looked down at Scout and wrinkled her nose. "He needs a bath," she declared. "A serious bath. Tom, can you start the water? I'll get some old towels." Scout, who had finally allowed himself to relax slightly, felt a new wave of anxiety at the word bath. But Emma kept her hand on his head, a steady presence that kept him grounded. The bathtub in the downstairs bathroom became a scene of sudsy chaos. Scout had forgotten what warm water felt like, how good it could feel to be truly clean. At first, he'd resisted, his street-learned instincts screaming that being trapped in a tub with humans was dangerous. But as Diane's gentle hands worked shampoo through his matted fur, as the warm water sluiced away weeks of grime and fear, Scout felt something inside him begin to unclench. Emma sat on the closed toilet lid, talking to him in a constant, soothing stream of encouragement. "You're doing so good. Look at you. There's actually brown fur under all that dirt. I thought you were black. You're going to be so handsome when you're clean." The water that swelled down the drain was nearly black at first, then gray, and finally clear. Tom helped rinse Scout's back while Diane worked on his legs and paws, checking for injuries. They found cuts and scrapes, signs of his hard life on the streets, but nothing that seemed infected or serious. When they finally lifted him from the tub, Scout stood dripping on the bath mat, looking considerably smaller without all the matted fur and dirt adding bulk to his frame. But he also looked like himself again, like the dog he'd been before everything had fallen apart. They dried Scout with towels warmed in the dryer, and the simple luxury of it nearly broke something in the dog's chest. He'd been cold for so long, months, it seemed, that warmth had become an abstract concept, something other creatures enjoyed but not meant for him. Now, wrapped in fleece-scented cotton, his fur fluffing up under Emma's enthusiastic rubbing, Scout felt dangerously close to Hote. Tom, who'd been watching with grudging approval, disappeared into the garage and returned with an old comforter and several cushions. "He can sleep in the laundry room," he announced, setting up a makeshift bed on the floor. "Just for tonight." But Emma had other ideas. "He should sleep in my room," she insisted. "He had to sleep outside in the cold all this time. He deserves a Real bed." "Emma," her mother started. "Please, Mom." "He saved that baby. He's a Christmas miracle. Please." It was the mention of Christmas, now just hours away, that tipped the scales. Diane looked at Tom, who shrugged, a gesture of surrender. "Fine. But he stays on the floor, not in your bed." Emma's squeal of delight made Scout's tail wag despite his bone-deep exhaustion. She led him upstairs to her room, a space painted lavender and cluttered with stuffed animals, books, and the general chaos of childhood. The makeshift bed had been moved there, positioned beside Emma's bed like a guardian's post. Scout circled the cushions 3 times, an old ritual his body remembered, before collapsing with a sigh that came from his soul. Emma knelt beside him, stroking his head. "Thank you for saving that baby," she whispered. "I'm going to call you Scout. Is that okay? You were scouting around and found someone who needed help, so Scout fits. Do you like it?" Scout's only answer was the gradual slowing of his breathing as sleep finally claimed him. For the first time in months, he slept without one eye open, without listening for danger, without the cold gnawing at his bones. He slept the sleep of the truly safe, and he dreamed of babies crying in warm hands and a little girl who called him hero. Scout woke to the sound of excited whispers and the smell of cinnamon. For a moment, he was disoriented, his instincts screaming alarm at the enclosed space and unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned, the baby, the family, the warm bath and warmer bed, and his racing heart began to slow. Emma was sitting cross-legged on her bed, still in her nightgown, watching him with an expression of pure delight. "Merry Christmas, Scout," she said softly. "You slept for like 12 hours. Mom said not to wake you because you needed rest. Are you hungry? I bet you're hungry. Come on." Hungry didn't begin to describe it. Scout's stomach felt like it was trying to digest itself, and the smell wafting up from downstairs made him dizzy with longing. He followed Emma down to the kitchen, where Diane was preparing what looked like enough food to feed an army. "There's our hero," she said, smiling at Scout. She set down a large bowl filled with scrambled eggs, pieces of bacon, and kibble that Tom had apparently run out to buy at the one convenience store open on Christmas morning. Scout approached the bowl cautiously, still half convinced this was all some elaborate dream that would shatter if he moved too quickly. But the food was real, and once he started eating, he couldn't stop. He wolfed down the entire bowl in less than a minute, then looked up hopefully for more. "Slow down, buddy," Tom said, laughing despite himself. "Your stomach's been empty too long. You need to take it easy or you'll get sick." But they gave him another half bowl, and Scout ate that too, though he forced himself to go slower. When he was finished, he sat back on his haunches and looked at the family gathered around the kitchen, Tom leaning against the counter with his coffee, Diane by the stove, Emma sitting on the floor beside Scout, and something clicked into place. This felt right. This felt like home. The story broke on the local news just after 9 in the morning. Tom had turned on the television to check the weather forecast, and instead found himself staring at footage of his own front porch. "Breaking news this Christmas morning," the anchor said, her face appropriately solemn but with an undercurrent of wonder. An abandoned newborn was found in the early hours of this morning, rescued by an unlikely hero, a stray dog who carried the infant to safety. The screen showed the Petersons' house, though the address was blurred. Then it cut to an interview with the female police officer from the night before. "This dog demonstrated remarkable intelligence and compassion," the officer explained. "He found the infant in an alley where she certainly would have died from exposure, carried her several blocks to a residential area, and alerted the family by barking and physically hitting their door. Thanks to his actions, the baby is now at City Hospital in stable condition." The family watched in stunned silence. Emma was the first to recover, launching herself at Scout with enough force to nearly knock him over. "You're famous. You're on TV. Everyone in the whole world knows you're a hero." Tom sat down heavily on the couch, still staring at the screen. "This is going to be a circus," he muttered. "Once people figure out which house this is." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Tom answered it to find a reporter and cameraman on his porch, their van parked conspicuously at the curb. "Mr. Peterson, I'm Jennifer Chen from Channel 7. We'd love to talk to you about what happened last night. And is it true you have the hero dog with you?" Before Tom could answer, 3 more news vans pulled up to the house. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. The quiet Christmas morning erupted into chaos. Diane ushered Scout and Emma into the den, away from the windows. "This is insane," she said, but she was smiling. "Our address is going to be all over the news by noon." "Good," Emma declared, hugging Scout fiercely. "Everyone should know what he did. He's the best dog in the whole world." The phone began ringing before Tom had even closed the door on the third reporter. He let it go to voicemail, then checked the messages and immediately regretted it. "Tom, this is your mother. I just saw the news. Call me right now. Are you telling me you have a stray dog in the house with Emma? Have you lost your minds?" Beep. "Hi, this is the producer for Good Morning America. We'd love to feature your family and the hero dog on tomorrow's show. Please call." Beep. "Mr. Peterson, I'm an attorney representing." Tom stopped listening and turned off the phone. He looked at Diane, who was fielding similar calls on her cell. "We need to talk," he said quietly. They gathered in the den after sending Emma upstairs to play, though she took Scout with her, unwilling to let him out of her sight. Tom paced while Diane sat on the couch, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. "This is bigger than we thought," Tom began. "The news, the reporters, the calls. Emma's already attached to that dog, and we both know it. But Diane, We can't keep him. We never planned to have a dog. The expense, the responsibility. He saved a baby's life, Diane interrupted quietly. He carried her through the cold and the snow to our door specifically. Out of all the houses on this street, he chose ours. That was random chance, was it? Tom, I've been thinking about this all morning. What are the odds? A homeless dog finds an abandoned baby, doesn't hurt it or ignore it, but instead carries it to safety. Then picks our house, the house with a little girl who was still awake and watching from her window, who saw the whole thing and understood what was happening. That's not chance. That's divine intervention. Tom's voice was skeptical, but his expression was uncertain. I don't know what to call it, but I know that dog upstairs is exactly what Emma has been asking for since she turned 6. And I know that we have the space, the resources, and now a very compelling reason to give him a home. The call came just before noon, interrupting the discussion that had been going in circles for the past hour. Tom answered his cell cautiously, expecting another reporter. Instead, he heard, "Mr. Peterson, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez from City Hospital. I'm calling about the infant that was brought in early this morning." Tom's expression changed instantly, growing serious. He put the phone on speaker so Diane could hear. "How is she?" "She's doing well, all things considered. Her core temperature was dangerously low when she arrived, and there are signs of distress from the birth, but she's stable now. She's a fighter." Dr. Martinez paused. "I'm calling because the baby's story is remarkable, and the police mentioned that a dog brought her to your house. Is that animal still with you?" "He is," Tom confirmed, glancing toward the stairs. "Our daughter has claimed him, and he seems content to stay." "I'm so glad to hear that. Mr. Peterson, I've been a doctor for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of things. But this, the baby was suffering from severe hypothermia when she arrived. Another 30 minutes in those temperatures, maybe less, and we would have lost her. That dog didn't just find her. He saved her life in the most literal sense. The police are calling her a Christmas miracle, but I think the real miracle is that dog." Tom felt something shift in his chest. "Doctor, do you know anything about where she came from? Who left her?" "Not yet. The police are investigating, but so far, no leads. She's in state custody now, and after she's released from the hospital, she'll go into the foster system." Dr. Martinez hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say this, but if your family is interested, well, the state is always looking for good foster families, especially for infants. Given your role in saving her life, I think you'd be considered favorably." The words hung in the air after the call ended. Tom and Diane looked at each other, both thinking thoughts too big to voice yet. Upstairs, Scout rested his head on Emma's lap while she read him a story about a reindeer who saved Christmas, completely unaware that he'd just changed the course of multiple lives, including his own. The doorbell rang again in the early afternoon, but this time it wasn't a reporter. Tom opened the door to find an elderly woman standing on the porch, her silver hair neatly pinned, her winter coat pristine despite the snow. She carried a covered dish and wore an expression of gentle determination. "Mr. Peterson? I'm Margaret Holloway from 3 doors down. I brought cookies. May I come in?" Tom, overwhelmed by the morning's chaos, simply stepped aside. Margaret entered with the confidence of someone who'd been making social calls for 7 decades and wasn't about to stop now. She set the cookies on the hall table and turned to face Tom with eyes that missed nothing. "Where's the dog?" Scout appeared at the top of the stairs as if summoned, Emma right behind him. Margaret's face softened instantly. "Oh, you beautiful boy," she breathed. "Emma, would you bring him down so I can meet him properly?" Scout descended the stairs cautiously. He'd learned to read people during his time on the streets, and this woman radiated something different from the reporters, something genuine. When he reached the bottom, Margaret knelt with a grace that belied her age and extended her hand, letting him sniff it before moving. "I saw what you did last night," she said quietly. "Well, not saw exactly. My bedroom's at the back of the house. But I heard the commotion and watched from my window once the police arrived. I've lived in this neighborhood for 43 years, and I've never seen anything like it." She stroked Scout's head, her touch practiced and sure. "You're a German Shepherd, aren't you? I had one as a girl. Smartest dog I ever knew. They are loyal to a fault, protective, brave." She looked up at Tom. "Are you keeping him?" Tom opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure how to answer. But Emma had no such hesitation. Yes, his name is Scout and is staying forever. Margaret smiled. Good. He deserves a home after what he's done. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my nephew, Daniel Holloway. He's a veterinarian with a practice on Oak Street. I called him this morning after I saw the news. Yes, dear, your house was on every channel, and he's agreed to see Scout this afternoon if you'd like. No charge for the initial examination. It's the least we can do for a hero. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Tom found himself blinking back sudden emotion. Mrs. Holloway, that's incredibly kind, but we couldn't. You can and you will, Margaret interrupted firmly. That dog needs to be checked over properly. He's been on the streets, heaven knows for how long, and he deserves medical care. Daniel's expecting you at 3 o'clock. She stood, brushing imaginary dust from her coat. Now, I'll leave you to your Christmas. But Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Peterson, she looked at both of them meaningfully. Sometimes life puts exactly what we need right on our doorstep. It would be foolish to turn it away. With that cryptic advice delivered, she let herself out, leaving behind the cookies and a business card and the uncomfortable feeling that she'd seen right through to the heart of Tom's uncertainty. Emma, oblivious to the undercurrents, was already opening the cookie tin. Scout, you're going to the doctor. They'll make sure you're healthy so you can stay with us forever and ever.